And we're back live from Los Angeles. This is Bill Whittle's Hot Mic, and our guest on the line currently is David Webb, conservative talk show commentator and an all-around swell guy. I haven't had a chance to talk to him before, but I like him very much. David, we've been talking in the first half about some historical examples. We talked about 54th Massachusetts and in the Civil War and the Tuskegee Airmen in World War II. Examples of a different way to approach these racial differences than the hate speech laws of the left. My understanding is you're on the Young Marines National Federation. Even today, you go into the... I've been privileged to do many things with the military. I was on board the USS Pasadena for a couple hours, 600 feet below the Pacific. And my impression there was that, you know, there were no blacks, browns, yellows. There's just, you know, blue. And I've heard it's the same thing is true for green for guys on the ground. It's paradoxical, isn't it, David, that in an organization with uniforms and the regimentation and the discipline and command structure and all of that, nevertheless, it seems like military service is where you are most dependent on somebody else as an individual. Is this a good person? Yes or no? Can I count on this person if things start to go south? Yes or no? And do you still feel that military is pretty much colorblind out there?
You know, the military is with the men and women that serve. They do see it that way in large part. Of course, there are varying opinions within it. It's the leadership that's become a problem. And we're seeing the change in leadership right now. The leadership under Obama was moved over to a social engineering experiment. Only in the military under Obama could you find commanders who would spend $30 million to do a test of men and women in the Marine Corps to find out that there was a difference in physical ability. You didn't need $30 million for that.
What?
You had the social experimentation.
I am shocked.
Yeah, it's $30 million.
Who knew?
Yeah, who knew? And the thing is, they were pushing an agenda to get to an end result. And when it didn't work out their way, they went on to the next thing. Surprise, surprise, there were gay people in the military all along. The rank and file know this. They dealt with it, as you said. When I'm in need of someone who's got my six, when I've got something that I need done, is that person dependable? Can they carry me off the battlefield if I'm injured? They don't care what you do in your personal life. So the biggest thud was, oh my God, gays in the military, they've always been there. The social engineering is being turned around now. The command structure, the military, they're going back to the combatant command approach, which is we need to have the best war fighters, the most capable, smartest people. You look at 19-year-olds. You're on the Pasadena. I was recently on the Kearsarge, one of the great names in naval history in this country. And I meet with these young 19 and 20-year-olds who literally are responsible for billions of dollars of not only equipment, but immeasurable the cost of their fellow sailors and their fellow Marines' lives. Mm-hmm. The trust, the working together of the teams on the deck, on the flight deck, below decks, everybody doing their part from the engine room all the way to the battle bridge, getting the job done.
This tells me that 90% or more of the racial problems that we have in this country are manufactured by the left. They're just made, they're manufactured by it. They call them community organizers, used to call them agitators. They just manufacture so much of this. Let's go back briefly to that, the story that got us started, that they've set up a hotline in Minneapolis so that if you hear anything that you might consider to be anti-Muslim or in any way prejudicial or harmful, you can call this number, rat out your neighbor, and then the city will step in and make sure that person doesn't speak their mind anymore. David, you know, when I was a kid, my dad was in the Army, and he got to Germany in the last week of World War II. He was never shot at, never a combat hero, nothing like that. But we were watching all kinds of shows like, you know, Combat and Hogan's Heroes, and one day I drew a backward swastika on my hand because I was trying to get it right because I was putting them on the wings of airplanes. I was showing U.S. airplanes shooting down, you know, German airplanes. That's what we drew. And my dad saw that on my hand, and he lost his mind. He really was pretty upset. It took a while for him to realize that, you know, no, Dad, I'm just trying to figure out how to draw this thing. Here's the reason I say this. I say this because, I'm sorry about that background. I say this because the problem with something being dedicated as hate speech is that who decides, right? I mean, who makes the decision? It always comes down to that. Who's going to decide? My dad said the Nazis should be allowed to march in Illinois. I said, Dad, you hate the Nazis. You gave me this lecture. He says, yes, but who decides?
It's an important lesson, and Skokie, Illinois was and is a signature, it's a landmark case, rather, for that very reason. What your dad was explaining is the difference between, or his reaction is the difference between outrage and discouraged action, because he didn't understand why you did it, as I see it, and then explaining what it is and what free speech is. But what they're doing in Minneapolis will fail. It will fail on a number of levels. If it ever met the constitutional test, it would fail in the court system if it ever got to the Supreme Court. And it would also fail culturally. What I would suggest that people look at is the example of what you should report. In San Bernardino, before that terrorist attack, the neighbors saw Muslims late night, and they knew they were Muslims, people dropping off things in the garage, things going on that didn't look right. If it was in a neighborhood where you were concerned about, say, a crack house, someone would likely report it as is their activity. That's drug-related activity. They chose not to report it. If you want to help the Muslims in Minneapolis,
sounds like we may have lost him. I think I might have lost him. Are you there, David? I think we may have lost our Skype connection to David. So let's just wrap it up by this. First of all, thank you very much, David Webb, for joining us today, and I'm sure we'll get a chance to show you out a little more formally and appropriately next time. But that was really tremendous what you said there. And so back to this issue of trying to resolve racial prejudice with things like laws and statutes and commandments and lecturing and hectoring and all the rest. I'll say this as clearly as I can. I would be honored, delighted, and proud to live in a country that was made up of nothing but David Webbs. I don't care what they look like. That is the kind of man who makes this country work, and the kind of people that make this country work. And when we get into where things really matter, like the military, for example, we find people get along really pretty well. We find they get along pretty well in football stadiums too, you know? Once you get away from all of this left-wing politics and all this left-wing agitation, you find out that you've got black and white and yellow and red Packer fans, and you've got a similar assortment of Bear fans. You're either a Gator or you're a Seminole. Doesn't matter what you look like. This is of all the things that the left has done to this country, this is, to me, by far the worst. They've taken the deepest, most tender wound in this country. You know, the one thing that we really didn't get right at the beginning, and they are prying it open in order to make it bleed, because they would rather rule over the ruins of this society than just be sharing power with the rest of us in something where everybody's getting along. Well, that'll do it for Hot Mic today. I'm Bill Whittle. We will be back tomorrow on NRATV. We will see you then.